So as we move into chapter 3, we move with the history of the Israelites towards the promised land. They're now on the border. And as we do, we encounter this, their second major conflict, Og, king of Bashan. And this time there's no negotiation with Sihon. They asked, could they cross through, and they'd pay for food and water, etc., etc. Now Og comes out to meet them. News travels fast, as it were. And recognizing again that the struggle that this presents to us today regards understanding God's nature, what we do see in this is that this second generation now see God doing what the first generation doubted. If we were to go back, we'd see that they stand on the border, they send out the 12 spies to spy out the land, and they come back, and 11 of them say it's impossible. The people are huge, the cities are fortified, we can't do it. Roughly translated, God can't do it. He might have got us out of Egypt, might have got us across the Red Sea, but there's no way he can do this. And their doubt and their disbelief cost them everything. But now, this second generation see God doing this. We see that Og is, well, his bed is 13 feet long. Some translations say it's a coffin, but this idea, he is tall. We read the cities were well fortified. And this second generation learned what we see as impossible, God does not. And it challenges us today, as it must have challenged them. Doubt and disbelief in God will bring our own limited expectations to bear. And the challenge for us is, don't allow faith to be held hostage to our human expectations. But we also see here something of what we might term the mundane and the ordinary. A lot of geographical detail on the sort of the wrong side of the promised land, as it were, what's called the Transjordan. And we see this sort of establishing of what is often termed the Transjordan tribes, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half tribe of Manasseh. And if we were to go back to Numbers chapter 23, we would see there this sort of act happening. Remember, in Deuteronomy, Moses is looking back and saying, this is what happened. And in Numbers 32, when they sort of defeat these two kings, take over their kingdoms, the Reubenites and the Gadites and this half tribe of Manasseh see this land as good for livestock, of which they have plenty. And so they ask Moses, can we stay here and the other sort of 9.5 tribes cross over into the promised land, but we like this? And Moses strikes this concession with them that their families and their livestock can stay east of the Jordan, but they've got to, their fighting men have to cross over, and when the land is subdued, the men can go back. And it looks good. It sounds good. But it split the people of God. We have some in the promised land and some not. And in the future, by the time we get to David and Solomon, or after Solomon, this split would cause a further breakdown in unity. And then as this chapter comes to a close, we come to the very personal. Moses, because of his outburst of anger, is not allowed to enter the promised land. And again, he's recalling the event that happened and is recorded in Numbers chapter 20. They're in the wilderness. The Israelites are grumbling. There's no water. You've brought us out here to die, etc., etc. Moses pleads with God, and God says to Moses, "Speak to this rock, and water will flow." But Moses, in his anger at the people, he hits the rock with his staff. The water flows, but he's disobedient, his anger against the people. And because of that, he is excluded by God from entering the promised land. And again, we can see this as being really harsh. Why does God exclude Moses from entering the promised land on this minor faux pas when he's faithfully led the Israelites out of Egypt and through the wilderness for 40 years? But what we see is Israel has to learn what the church today has seemingly forgotten. That God is a jealous God. He looks for and longs for our obedience, soul obedience to him. We, if we call ourselves followers of Christ, should be just that. And this is what, when we work through the New Testament, we saw Paul wrestling with the churches there. It's not Christ plus our career, our self-comfort, our self-betterment. It's not the 10 commandments plus a few of our own. God calls his people to follow him fully and completely. And again, we see echoes of this in the New Testament. In Paul's letters, Paul says, "I died to self so that I might follow Christ." And so Moses sees the promised land from a distance. And then he has to hand over his leadership to Joshua. And all the way through, if we look carefully, we see Joshua in sort of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. Joshua's always there in the background, very quietly, but he's there. And I guess this brings another lesson for the church today, that we may never fully see the outworking of God's plan, but also we must learn the grace of letting others take on the mantle. So I'll stop there. I guess that's going to raise some discussion, as all